sometimes we sort of get lost, right? We focus in on one poll and one narrative, and sometimes there are competing narratives, and I think it's worth just taking a step back because I think some people are like, well, the polls said one thing and another thing happened. Actually, the polls here differ quite a bit. Democrats lead in choice and choice for Congress. Look at this. New York Times poll came out yesterday, it's 10. That matches with Marist, that was 10. But the Washington Post came out within the last month, that was 5. Fox News came out in the last month, that was 5. And then the CNN poll that we were discussing last week, right? That was a 3-point lead. There's quite this bit of variance that is going on right here. And you know what? This is actually a good thing. This is a normal thing. This is what happens when you have margins of error that are going out there. You'd expect an average, but then you have a range of possible results around that average, and we're not necessarily sure which one is right if the election were held today. And of course, there's the extra variance of the fact that the election is not being held until November.
All right, a range of possible results. And in this case, you
want to hit a pen, Johnny.
I'm going to hit a pen. There we go.
There you go.
In this case, this result would be wildly different than that result.
Right. Okay. So you see, this is, of course, the choice, the national popular vote for the House. But what does that mean in terms of seats? What's the difference between, let's say, Democrats winning by 10 versus winning by 3? And this is where it gets really interesting. Okay. So even if you take redistricting into account, given a popular vote win of, let's say, 3 points, what would that mean for Democratic House gains? They gain probably somewhere, an estimate is between 0 and 6 seats, which at the upper end of that range would be enough to take back the House. But in the lower end of that range, that would not be. That would be Republicans holding on. But what about that 10-point lead that you see in Marist, the New York Times? Well, that would be a ginormous blowout. And this is just an estimate. It could be higher, a little bit higher, a little bit lower. But we're talking about an estimate of a Democratic gain of between 20 to 30 seats or more. They could be ending up 245 seats or north of there potentially versus being stuck, let's say, 213, 214, 215, 216, maybe barely getting to a majority. So look, when you see this range of potential results, I want you to keep in mind, yes, Democrats are probably favored to take back the House. It's by no means a guarantee, but they could end up blowing the Republicans right out of the water. All of that is within the margin of error at this point, especially given that we're months from the election.
Yes, the difference between maybe not taking it and taking it by a lot. That's
correct.
The variance in the polls right now. So, Professor Renton, what does one do? What does one do at this stage of the game when you have these polls showing all these different things?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Professor Berman. And what we would do is we might average the polls together, and you can see that there's been a clear shift towards the Democrats in the average poll. Choice for Congress margin. You go back to Election Day last year, in November of 2025, Democrats were ahead by 4. They're now ahead by 7 in the average poll at this point. And that, if that average held, that will result very much assuredly a clear Democratic majority. And then the last little thing that I will note here is just, Kalshi prediction market chance that Democrats in the midterms, 218 House, and then let's say gaining in the Senate, but not necessarily taking it back. Look at this. 69% chance, a very nice 69% chance. So Democrats are still in the catbird seat here. They're likely to gain the House, likely to gain the Senate, but it's by no means a guarantee. The promise of a Trump presidency in the minds of the American people have turned into a reality, and a reality that for them is a nightmare, because just take a look here. Okay, Trump will or is making you financially worse off, better off. Back in October of 2024, the reason why he won a second term, 44% said better off, outrunning the worse off at 38%. But look at these numbers. Down through the floor on the better off now, just 14%. Just 14%. I see Johnny off on the side shaking his head. Trump making them financially better off. Meanwhile, the worse off up like a rocket. The clear majority now, 57% of Americans now say that Trump is making them financially worse off. Back in 1980, Ronald Reagan asked, are you better off than you were 4 years ago? As Americans look back now compared to a year and a half ago, their minds on Donald Trump are definitely saying he's made them worse off.
I mean, look at that drop, a 30-point drop in a couple of years. And if you think 14% is low.
Yeah, if you think 14% is low, how low can you go? Well, how about this? Okay, Trump Willer is making you financially worse off, better off among independents. Look at this. The better off now is just 8. It's just 8. When you can count it on your hands, the number is low. Just 8% say that Trump is making them financially better off among independents. Way, way down from the 40% who said that back in October of 2024 when the better off was outrunning the worse off at 38%. Look at that. That 38%, again, up like a rocket. I feel like I'm at NASA. Look at this. 64% of independents now say that Trump is making them financially worse off. These are numbers we've seen among independents over and over and over again. They have turned against Trump, and now about two-thirds
I mean, these independent numbers are staggering. I mean, 8% is not zero.
No.
But it's closer to zero than it is to 50.
That's exactly right. When you're closer to 0% than you are to 50% as a politician, you know your numbers are bad.
All right, independents obviously a key swing group. What about some of the groups that were key or have been in the past to Donald Trump's electoral success?
Yeah, normally you want to be winning over independents because the way independents go is the way the nation goes. But you definitely want to be holding on to your base. And of course, one key part of Donald Trump's base is non-college whites, whites without a college degree. And even they are flipping on the President of the United States. Trump is or will make you financially worse off, better off. Back in October of 2024, look at that, 54% better off, well outpacing worse off at 30%. Now we're looking at basically the inverse. Just 15% say better off among white voters without a college degree. Trump is making them financially better off. And now even there, the majority of non-college whites, a key part of Donald Trump's base, are saying he's making them financially worse off. These are numbers that would make me, if I were a Republican running in the midterm elections, be quite worried. The bottom line is this. There's been all this talk about, oh, Donald Trump has this floor. Well, I'll tell you, that floor looks like it was built by the worst carpenters I've ever seen because he just keeps falling through that floor. And it's not just the New York Times poll. This is what I think is so important. Yes, the Times poll got people talking, but it just follows a slew of polling data that all shows the same thing, and that is that Donald Trump is not just under 40%, he's well under 40% in terms of his approval rating. 37% New York Times. CBS came out on Sunday, 37%. Ipsos, 36%. Our CNN poll, 35%. You put it all together, and it is just very clear at this point that Donald Trump is hitting new lows in his polling data, and this one poll is no outlier. It is part of a much larger trend, Kate Baldwin.
You talked about sub 40. So put that in like a historical context then. What does it look like for president?
Yeah, okay. So you see sub 40, sub 40, sub 40, sub 40. Well, you go back in term twos, right, for different presidents, and there are only other two presidents who were sub 40 at this point in term two. And what happens in the midterm elections? Well, sub 40 approval ratings besides Trump at this point in term two. Well, one was Richard Nixon back in 1974. His party absolutely got crushed in the 1974 midterm elections, suffered huge losses, House and Senate. How about George W. Bush back in 2006? His party lost the House. His party lost the Senate. Again, 30-seat loss in the House for George W. Bush in 2006. A 6-seat loss in the United States Senate. So historically speaking, of course, we'll have to just wait and see what happens here. Yeah. But historically speaking, Kate Baldwin, when you have a president who has a sub-40 approval rating at this point, their party goes down to defeat in the midterm elections. Big losses for Nixon in 74 with the Republican Party, and Bush's Republican Party lost both the House and the United States Senate.
So the party suffers. What has history shown? Do the presidents recover?
Yeah, okay. Do these presidents ever recover? Let's look beyond just the midterm elections. Let's talk about legacy, right? The idea, hey, you know what? We still got more than 2 years' time until the end of Donald Trump's second term. But again, you just go back and look at the sub-40 approval ratings besides Trump. Did their approval rating ever recover? Well, I try and make it as simple here sometimes. Sometimes it's numbers, sometimes simply put it's words. The answer is no. In red, Nixon, of course, was out by August of 74. He ended up with, what, a 24% approval rating. And George W. Bush, you know what happened to him by the end of his term in 2009? He was actually in the high 20s. He wasn't just sub 40. He was in the 20s. Both Bush and Nixon ended up in the 20s in approval rating. Again, I'm not saying that's going to happen with Donald Trump. This is a sample size of 2, but this is history that you definitely don't want to be a part of. You do not want to be part of this brotherhood. You want to be way beyond it, because if Donald Trump is a part of this brotherhood, that means he ended his term historically unpopular.
How popular are pickles?
Yeah, no wonder that politicians turn to pickles, because you know what? We have had the last two presidents haven't been too hot to trot, right? Joe Biden, Donald Trump, their favorable ratings are way down there in the basement, in the 30s, right? But Pickles, my dear friend, Pickles should run for president, because take a look at this. The popularity of Pickles, wow. 72%, twice as popular as Donald Trump is, more than twice as popular than Joe Biden is. I say that on the ballot come the 2028 election, we should have a Republican Party, a Democratic Party, and then a Pickle Party. That's what I say.
That's the third party option. Interesting, Harry. So this just gives us an idea. Does it bring us together? Do they delight us and unite us?
They delight us, unite us, and I relish how popular pickles are. Yes, every pun in the world I will be using during this segment, Sarah Seidner. Look, in a world in which we are so divided, Democrats and Republicans both enjoy pickles. I mean, the popularity rating, look at this, 71% among Democrats, 74% among Republicans. Honestly, when you look at the polling data, the only other thing that I can find basically that is as popular besides apple pie is Dolly Parton. So maybe we could get a nice ticket of Dolly Parton, and maybe the VP can be pickles.
That is a sweet deal I'd take any day. I love me some Dolly. All right, so what are we doing? Tomorrow's Pickle Day, National Pickle Day.
So what we're doing here, and I'll tell you something that you don't know, is we're about to try pickled smoothies, you and I. Here we go, there it is. Sarah Seidner and I are going to try this pickle smoothie. I have no idea. Neither of us have tasted this, right?
Okay, is there milk in this?
I have no idea what is in this except for pickles. Let's go. No milk.
Oh, that's fine. Oh,
Is it?
I liked it.
Hold on.
Oh, no, we're dividing America because you don't like it at all.
No, I like pickles. You know what? A little bit more on it. It's sour to start off with, but then it has a creamy undertexture.
It's the banana.
It's the banana. So pickles comes in, gives you sour, and then you have a little sweet banana at the end. Or maybe that's a new ticket for you. Bananas and pickles, Sarah Seidner.
It's bananas. We like the pickle smoothie.
There we go.
Cheers to you.
Cheers
Happy
to you.
Pickle Day, America.
I can't think of an endorsement in Republican politics that has ever been as important as Donald John Trump's endorsement. And you see it in Texas. You saw, obviously, in Kentucky earlier tonight. You saw it in Louisiana over the weekend. And you see it in the Texas polling as well. Because just take a look here. Impact of Trump's endorsement, Texas Senate, among Republicans. Look at what you see here. 55% of Republicans say that you would be more likely to vote for the candidate Donald Trump endorses. You see 36% say no impact. Look at this, though. Just 9% say less likely to vote for the candidate that Trump endorses. But overall here, it's just very clear. If you get Trump's endorsement, as Ken Paxton has, then all of a sudden what we should expect to see is Republican voters lining up behind Ken Paxton, which, of course, is what we've seen in basically every single other contest, including obviously in Kentucky earlier this evening.
But with Lisa Murkowski's comment there, she said, how does it help the president if we ended up losing Texas? It's because there's a real question about how Ken Paxton would fare against James Tallarico, the Democrat, come November.
Yeah, okay. So I think it's so important to note that you have one world, one galaxy in which you have the Republican primary electorate, and then you have a completely other galaxy, which is the general electorate. And the polling here really tells the story, right? Because even before the endorsement, what you essentially saw here was a very close race, but one in which Ken Paxton was actually favored to win in the runoff over John Cornyn, obviously the incumbent. Paxton was ahead 48% to 45%. Based upon slide number 1, of course, I expect that Paxton's lead is going to climb ever higher. So you see these numbers right here, but then look towards the general election because it is a completely different world. Because you can see it right here. Okay, choice for Texas Senate. You got Tallarico here at 44%. And then look at here, Ken Paxton, a Republican in Texas. The best he can do at this point is averaging 40% of the vote. I mean, I was looking at all the polling I could find. This is the best that a Democrat for Senate has been polling since like 2002. That is a very long time ago. When you have to go all the way back since I was in middle school, you know that the Democrat in this particular case is polling well in Texas.
Harry Enten, that's why we keep you around, so we can go back to your middle school years.
I know.
Thank you, Harry, for those numbers.